leaders of the ROK and DPRK are set to meet next month for the first time in over a decade. After a deluge of international diplomacy and with the world watching, how can both sides prepare for this monumental meeting? And as China maintains it does not seek to export its way of development, the U.S. has been promoting its values around the world, but with limited success. Why is liberal democracy struggling to take root in many parts of the world? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. On Thursday, the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea announced that they will hold a summit on April the 27th in the Chuth village of Panmunjom. This will be the first such summit in 11 years. The announcement came in the wake of DPRK leader Kim Jong Un's visit to China this week and prior to the planned meeting between Kim and U.S. President Donald Trump in May. As Kim talked about changing the relationship between the North and the South from one of confrontation to one of reconciliation and cooperation, what will this upcoming inter-Korean summit bring to the two sides? And how will the summit set the tone for future efforts to resolve the nuclear issue? Joining me in the Beijing studio is Associate Professor Chen Xiaohe from the School of International Studies at Renmin University. Professor Chen, thank you very much for joining us today. First of all, could you tell us the connection between Kim's China visit and this upcoming meeting between him and his South Korean counterpart, Moon Jae-in?
I think it's Thursday's summit between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong Un helped to kick in the season of summit diplomacies among the major powers. You see, following Xi and the Kim summit, and Kim will visit Russians very soon. And on the 27th, two Korean leaders will meet. And a few weeks later, and Mr. Trump and Kim Jong Un were going to meet. And we are going to witness a lot of the summit taking place in order to cope with North Korea's nuclear denuclearizations. So we're going to see the Thursday's summit will kick in the season of summit diplomacy.
However, haven't we already heard about such a summit being planned even before Mr. Kim Jong Un made his visit to China? I mean, the two Koreas were already talking about meeting each other sometime early this year. Yeah,
that's as the two summits announced by North Korea, South Korea, and the United States. Few speculations that some things may happen between China and the United States. You see, and South Koreans sent a special envoy to China to brief the ongoing interactions between two Koreans, and also after President Trump accepted North Korea's leaders' invitation to have a summit, and Trump made phone call to our President Xi Jinping. So there's a lot of the communication going on, but we fail to witness some communications between North Korea and China, and this summit helped to make up such kind of absence of communications.
So it connected the loop. I'm told that we can be joined by Dr. Jim Walsh, who is Senior Research Associate at the MIT Security Studies Program. Dr. Walsh, thank you very much for joining us. In your eyes, how is the upcoming inter-Korean summit going to shape or influence the planned summit between Kim Jong Un and U.S. President Donald Trump?
Well, I think it'll be absolutely critical. The South Koreans are playing a particular role here. Now, the four main parties, China, the U.S., North Korea, and South Korea, there can be no progress, there can be no agreement without the full participation of all the parties in support of negotiations. But South Korea's role is special here, different than the others. After all, they are the ones, President Moon, who initiated this process in the first place. And they are the linkage, sort of communicating back and forth so far between North Korea and the White House. And it seems to me that North Korean-South Korean summit will be critical for defining the agenda, the range of possibilities for the actual discussion between Chairman Kim and Mr. Trump, who have never met each other before. And so South Korea sort of acting as a go-between and a party that the U.S. trusts and apparently that the North trusts will be critical.
Do you think the United States will be welcoming closer ties or warmer ties between the two Koreas? Previously, the United States and the ROK are close allies, and analysts have been saying that the DPRK has successfully driven a wedge between the U.S. and the ROK in the past few months with its diplomacy. How do you look at this kind of comments?
Well, we get this every time there are negotiations. You know, I've been at this a long time, and we've had negotiations periodically, and it normally takes this form. You know, all the parties want the U.S. to talk to North Korea because the U.S. doesn't want to talk. Finally, the U.S. agrees to talk, and then everyone's scared they're going to be left out. And we see a little of this already. And then the second dynamic is once there's an agreement to talk, everyone starts to worry that this is driving a wedge in the U.S. alliance. This is just a natural pattern of these things. I think we have, secondly, if we step back, this is quite an unusual moment in international relations. We have in South Korea more of a nationalist leader from the progressive camp who really wants to take South Korea in a direction towards better inter-Korean relations. We have a North Korea that always has had as an objective an ideal of disrupting the U.S.-Korean alliance. And then we also have, for the first time that I can remember, a U.S. president whose attitude is, you know, that's okay by me. You guys, if you guys can settle this up, that's one less thing I have to worry about. So the stars have aligned in a way where really the three leaders appear to feel comfortable about moving towards a closer set of bilateral relations between North Korea and South Korea.
Professor Chung, during Kim Jong Un's visit to China this time, we didn't hear him mentioning the six-party talks, which has been stalled since 2008. What is his problem, or why does he not want to mention this idea at this moment? Is he trying to meet every party that is concerned in the crisis and talk to them all separately, or might he come back to the six-party talks?
I think it's for the time being that the bilateral talks may be more efficient. And North Korea could talk to the South Koreans, and China could talk to North Korea, the United States could talk to North Korea. That would make things a little bit simple. But unfortunately, the six-party talk has been suspended for more than 8 years. But the Security Council's resolution passed in the previous years still recognize the relevance of the six-party talk. I believe if the time become mature, and if the party feel necessary, the sixth party will be jump-started.
Let's talk a little bit about the preconditions Mr. Kim Jong Un has set for denuclearization. He says the conditions are that South Korea and the United States respond to the DPRK's efforts with goodwill, create an atmosphere of peace and stability while taking progressive and synchronized measures for the realization of peace. What exactly does he mean by these words?
I think it is better for North Korea to make clarifications on the very content of the goodwill of what could constitute a favorable atmospheres for the talks, for the denuclearizations. But from my perspective, I believe North Korea has dropped two preconditions publicly. So one, United States need to offer the safety to North Korea's regime. Secondly, United States also need to remove military threat to North Korea. That's the two preconditions laid down by North Korea. But two things miss out for such a kind of interaction between United States and North Korea. The two missed point is, what about economic compensations? Does North Korea need economic compensations? I believe so. And the second missed point is whether or not the international community, specifically State Council, need to lift sanctions against DPRKs.
Right. Well, you didn't mention any of those. Dr. Welsh, how do you read the preconditions that Kim Jong Un has brought up for the denuclearization of his country? Do you think these conditions his positions have softened compared to previous versions?
Well, over the years, the North Koreans, when they've talked about denuclearization, they've invoked a couple of different things that they wanted that would clear the path for that. They've talked about having a peace treaty before with the 4 armistice countries. They've talked about removal of U.S. troops from the Korean Peninsula. I think, what is it that they want this time? That's why the South Korean and North Korean summits and discussions are important, as was Kim's travel to Beijing to speak with President Xi, because presumably they are beginning to articulate what this year, at this moment, they would require in order to move towards denuclearization. I will say, though, and I agree with my colleague, that they've already shown some flexibility. You'll remember that, and they've taken different positions over time, but first of all, they said, after years of
but do you think the U.S. administration, do you think the Trump administration is likely to be qualified as meeting those preconditions?
Well, I don't think it makes sense to prejudge the talks before anyone has actually sat down at the table. I mean, that's what this process is about. That's how a negotiation proceeds. And rarely is it the case in a negotiation that the initial proposals by any one player are the final proposal. That's why you have a negotiation. It seems to me that there is, for good or for ill, certainly I think the U.S. comes to this without, will come to these discussions with a rather open mind, if only because they haven't had a lot of time to prepare. President Trump is his own man and likes to sort of do things on the fly. That creates more flexibility and possibilities than would be traditionally the case when you have sort of a bottom-up negotiation. This is a top-down negotiation. Whatever the two leaders agree to, then that suddenly becomes the real possibility. So I think it's fluid. I think it's unpredictable. And frankly, it's not clear to me that the North Koreans expected President Trump to say yes to their invitation. So they may be scrambling a bit themselves.
Okay, I have about 30 seconds for each of you, and I want to ask each of you the same question. Professor Chen, what are what is the biggest possible hiccup that we can see at this moment? Can we really trust the sincerity on the part of the DPRK and on the part of the United States to really get this going?
I think the distrust among the major powers, particularly between the North Korea and the United States, may play a very negative role. And also the denuclearization issue itself very complicated and
But just
complex.
Between now and May, do you think what could have happened? What could be a possible surprise?
I think it's hard to rule out any kind of a surprise, but for the time being, I think that they can move on and have summit on time.
Yeah, Dr. Welsh, what is your evaluation of the possible risks that we might experience over the next month or so?
Well, I think that there's a good chance the president will pull out of the Iran deal on May 12th. That may have repercussions. I think that the concerns, if this thing crashes and burns, it could go very badly very quickly. But it seems to me the dangers here are less, your policy positions 1 through 4, and much more, given this president, matters of personality. Will the two leaders gel when they meet? Will there be something that upsets one of them? These two guys have never gotten together before, so I think there is a great promise and great risk. And if it goes well, it could be the beginning of a new chapter, and if it goes poorly, it could put parties on a fast track to an armed conflict. So I think I personally will be on pins and needles over these next couple of months, because anything could happen.
Some people are also questioning the sincerity of the DPRK, saying they are not really disclosing all of their nuclear weapons program in terms of disarmament or denuclearization. You need to talk about not just the plutonium, but all the other possible nuclear weapons as well. Do you see any possibility in there that they're really hiding some of their nuclear activities? Dr. Welsh, really now 30 seconds.
Yeah, of course they are. They always have. Of course they are. The question is whether that is impediment enough to prevent progress in the negotiations. And we won't know what their true intentions. or what they will do until we test those through negotiation.
Okay, thank you very much, my two guests, Associate Professor Chen Xiaohe from the School of International Studies at Renmin University and Dr. Jim Walsh, Senior Research Associate at MIT Security Studies Program. You're watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Stay with us. Until recently, liberal democracy has reigned triumphant. For all its shortcomings, most in the West were deeply committed to it, and the political system in places, such as the United States, was promoted as a model for most to aspire to. And yet, recent history has seen limited success in this system taking roots in other parts of the world, and a crisis of confidence within Western democracies themselves. As China is criticized for having trailblazed a different path, tweaking its system along the way, questions are being asked about the future of the US's efforts to promote the concept of liberal democracy abroad. Earlier, I spoke to Thomas Carothers, Senior Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I started by asking him what democracy promotion means for the US. He says that above all, the US wants to foster respect for individuals.
It's been my experience. I've had the chance to work in a lot of countries around the world. When you go and you talk to people in almost any country, they're not sure what political system they want. They want the one that performs the best. But what they do want is to be respected by their power holders. They want to be listened to. They want to have a chance to say what they think and have a chance to criticize and have a chance to choose. That's what I find universal. And when they have those opportunities, then you can begin to build a political system around those concepts.
Well, it is somehow different from what we hear about the US's efforts to promote its democratic system abroad. What we hear, for instance, is the idea that there is this ideal that the Western democratic system, for instance, in the election, a parliament, or one person, one vote, and this kind of idea should be promoted to other countries so that other countries will follow the same system. Is that not what we're talking about here? Well,
there are certain core principles of democracy that are the same whether you're talking about democracy in South Africa, in Denmark, in Canada, or the United States or elsewhere. So the United States is not interested in a McDonald's type of democracy where you walk in, it's the same menu everywhere with respect to what particular kind of institutions you have. But there are certain basic principles of democracy that are irreplaceable. The right of citizens to say what they think, to criticize their leaders when necessary, and to, above all, to choose their leaders. What the particular forms of a legislature are, or of local government, etc., that's all to be worked out by the country itself. But there are universal principles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, that are fundamental, it seems to be, to most individuals in most parts of the world.
Well, there are countries which would have very different circumstances than that of the Western countries or the United States. How much do you think those circumstances should be taken into consideration? For instance, in Afghanistan, this is a country that is nowhere near the kind of level of development that is enjoyed by people in other parts of the world. Do you think in that country, at this particular level, the kind of political rights and freedoms can be equally exercised given the level of instability and lack of development?
Well, if a country is in a state of civil war or active fighting, of course the state, the government, needs to get on its feet and consolidate the country, and it's hard to build pluralism when a civil war is raging. Although, on the other hand, it's hard for such a government to suppress everyone and to control all the opinions and so forth. So, of course, if a country is in a fundamental state of disorder, it's going to be hard to construct any political system. So you need to transition to some kind of stability, and then from there you can start to build a more effective political system.
But again, what I have witnessed, what I have seen, or what I've perceived is the effort in Afghanistan to build the kind of liberal democracy that is very much in the footsteps of the Western system. Why do you think that is place instead of the system, what is suited probably, or what was wanted by the Afghanistan people, for instance, a lawyer jirga, which is, you know, a father figure such as the king.
Well, actually, the key principle of the loya jirga is bringing together all of the major parts of the society to talk together and reach a peaceful consensus in which everyone is listened to, and everybody has a right to express their opinion, and power is shared. And so you could sort of say it's not really clear what the exact form of government Afghans want, but it was clear that people wanted a voice in their government. They wanted the chance to choose. They wanted a chance to come together and build a sense of consensus and solidarity within the society. So I don't think you said the loya jirga process is the opposite of democracy, but it's certainly the opposite of an authoritarian system which imposes a single point of view on a diverse society.
But what I understood was, while the people wanted the loya jirga, of course, with all its consultative functions, but there is this tradition that needs to be respected, that people wanted that kind of comfort to have a monarch above them who can serve whatever role was necessary, whereas the United States thought, you know, it was better to have a presidential system, and actually an American chosen candidate was put into that position. Do you approve that kind of practice, or do you think that is not your way, your understanding of the promotion of democracy?
Well, look, the Afghan case is a particularly difficult case. The United States made a lot of mistakes in Afghanistan. But the idea of giving Afghans the chance to have a political voice, to say what they think, and to choose their own leader, I don't think is an imposition of a foreign idea on Afghanistan. If you go back to the 1960s in Afghanistan, it was a time of constitutional rule, it was a time of respect for law, it was a time of respect for diversity, and it was others, like the Taliban and other forces that have come into the country and imposed a single vision on Afghanistan that I think actually go against the traditions of Afghanistan, which are towards tolerance and towards diversity. So yes, the United States has made some mistakes there, no question about that. And the United States in general should not be in the business of invading other countries and trying to impose a particular kind of government. But to say that the Afghans only blindly want to follow a monarch, in a sense, is condescending towards Afghans who don't show that in their own diverse history.
What is the right approach then in fostering the kind of help that the people really want?
In most countries where the United States and Canada and Spain and Denmark and other democracies that try to work across borders, what you try to do is come to a society and say, we've had some experiences and some lessons, as have other countries, and if you would like to help, we would like to help you learn, if possible, from other people's experiences. We're not telling you what to do, but you've expressed an interest in this country. Say South Africa has come out of apartheid, and they'd say, we'd like to have a system where people choose their government. How has that worked in other places? Should we have a legislature with 2 houses? Should we have elections every 2 years or every 4 years? When countries make a movement towards democracy, I don't think there's anything wrong with other democracies being there to say, we have knowledge, we have resources, we could be partners in this process.
How do you explain the fact that over the past century, actually you wrote it in your own article, that over the past century the number of Western-style liberal democracies have seen limited success in taking roots in these countries? Why was that?
Actually, that's not what I said. Here's what I said. What's surprising, if you look at the last 100 years...
Well, what you said this, can I quote,
let
me try to get the exact quote. Democracy has unquestionably lost its global momentum. Dozens of newer democracies in the developing world are struggling to put down roots, and many older democracies, including, of course, the United States, are troubled.
That is what I said.
Okay.
But that's different. What I was talking about, a loss of momentum, is just the last 10 or 15 years. When you have a long expansion, which you've had of democracy, this is a historic period of democratization in the world over the last 100 years. We've gone from only 30 or 40 countries that are democratic to about 100 countries today. In the last 10 or 15 years, there has been a slowing of momentum. After a lot of gains, there's a plateau and a little bit of fading. So I'm just studying really the last 10 or 15 years there in that article, saying, why is it that we've had a little bit of slowing down? So it's not a larger historical phenomenon, but rather an interesting period that we could talk about of slowing down in the last 10 or 15 years.
So it's a matter of degree, not kind, in your word. But why?
Today there are as many democracies as there ever have been in history. We're in a period still of historic expansion of democracy.
Why is that?
Why is that? Because the more that individuals gain a certain economic base and ability to start making choices in their life economically, they start to want to make choices politically. And once people have the right to education and to a certain independence economically, they begin to want to have some independence politically. They want to have a say in what, how their life is shaped by the power holders. And so the gradual development of the world over the last several hundred years has led individuals to be more assertive, more autonomous, and to push for more political choice.
For instance, in the case of Libya or in the case of Tunisia, where you give people the kind of choice that political choice that they want, and yet things are not developing in that kind of natural direction you mentioned.
I can give you a long list of dictators who've dragged their country into terrible conditions over the years in Africa and Latin America and Asia and elsewhere. The idea that dictators are naturally good for their countries and developmental is usually a mistake. There are exceptions, and we can talk about that. Libya is an interesting case. For 50 years, a terrible, anti-democratic, despotic, repressive leader drags the country into just a terrible period, destroys all institutions, and when it finally falls apart, unfortunately collapses into chaos. Why does democracy get the blame for that? There's never been democracy in Libya. What happened was
the Western idea that once you get rid of that leader who is considered despotic, the country will be in good footing. I think this is the idea that is
You're right. The mistakes were made in the assumption that there might be a kind of natural process that once Gaddafi fell, that the country might develop well into something more pluralistic and so forth. But it was clear that that dictatorial government wasn't taking the country anywhere good. But it's true that the West underestimated the difficulty of going from a terribly dictatorial leader that didn't develop any institutions to something better. But to blame the state of Libya today on democracy would be a serious mistake. The state of Libya today is the legacy of a half-century of terrible leadership.
Very long topic, but we have to leave it there. Thomas Carothers, Senior Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And here is my point, my personal commentary. I think political systems are like shoes. However different they are in style, they need to meet the needs of the person who wears them. To give snow boots to someone lying on a beach is ridiculous, however well-made those boots may be. America's efforts to promote democracy abroad may well be laudable, if only they were there to provide the shoes that fit instead of the shoes that the U.S. thinks they should wear. There is no such thing as one size fits all. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Li Shuyin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.